Well, thank you all for coming. I like that it's a little intimate group. We'll just have our discussion with Miss Virginia Merkel, Mrs. Virginia. I don't know how many of you know Ginger, but she's been a fixture around Second for a long time. She's been in the choir for 40 years, remarkable, and also served as an elder and on the Business Affairs Committee. And then when she's not at Second, Ginger works for Wells Fargo as a financial advisor and is very involved with the American Red Cross and specifically the Tiffany Circle. So she's going to tell us more about that. But I'm just going to turn it over to Ginger and pass around an attendance sheet.
Okay, thanks, Celia. Appreciate it. Okay, this is going to be a little bit more of a discussion than it is a speech, but I guess what I would say is as things pop up, stick your hand up if you've got questions. Otherwise, I'll kind of run through a brief scenario and my faith journey, and then we can talk a little bit about how it compares to yours and other things. So it actually started right here. My husband, then boyfriend, was attending Second Pres, and I grew up in the Second Presbyterian Church. Actually, I grew up in First Presbyterian in Bloomington, but I grew up in Presbyterian faith. And like most college kids, wandered around in the wilderness and, tried on a bunch of different things. And so anyway, when I met Roger, he was already attending, and I thought, oh, my mom's going to love this, that I've snagged somebody that actually goes to church, first of all, and is Presbyterian secondly. So we began here, and I began singing in the choir probably November and December of '75, something like that. So everything that happened thereafter kind of goes back to that seminal moment. We were married in 1976, when I started singing in the choir, I didn't have any idea that it was going to end up forming my faith journey for the rest of my life. It just was a volunteer activity. I enjoyed it and went early on. Bob Sheffer, as many of you recall, was the director in those days, and Bob and I became friends pretty early on, and he knew I had a finance degree, so he said to somebody, you ought to put Ginger on the Business Affairs Committee, because in those days, there weren't very many women who had finance backgrounds. And little did I know that that was going to come in really handy later on. So I was invited on the Business Affairs Committee, and subsequently met Al Fox and Tom Lake and others. And somewhere along the line, Al Fox called me up one day and said, we'd like you to serve on the endowment trustees. And after I fell completely off my chair, I said, you sure you want me? And he said, well, we need a woman and we need a finance background. I said, okay, I can do that. And that was an amazing experience. I learned so much on that board. And Al and Tom Lake were both mentors of mine on that board. I learned a lot about endowment management, learned a lot about that process. So that was very rewarding and sort of laid the groundwork for some things that happened later on. I served on the session. I became a deacon and then an elder. And to this day, I will tell you that the deacons always have more fun. It's just a reality. The deacons have more fun than the elders do. But served on the session a number of times and on the nominating committee, one thing and another. And I was looking for other opportunities. And so I said to Paul Porter-Peter one day, I said, how did you get involved at the Presbyterian level? Because Jill Hudson had come the night before and given us a little talk. And I didn't know anything about the judicatory system for the Presbyterian Church. Still don't know as much as I'd like to. But I was pretty impressed with Jill. So Paul said, well, he said, I think they're looking for volunteers for Presbyterian Council. Now, I didn't even know what that was. So next thing I know, Jill calls me and says, I understand you'd like to volunteer for Presbyterian Council. And I said, well, I think so. Not exactly sure what it is. She said, you're perfect timing. Our Presbyterian meeting is over at Richmond First, and just come to that, and then you and I will get together afterwards and so on. Well, let me tell you, that was like stumbling into a French class. I walked into the Presbyterian meeting, and first of all, I didn't have any idea whether I was even eligible to vote, because we hadn't covered that yet. I didn't know what the job description was. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I'm sort of wandering around in the wilderness trying to figure out the order of the Presbyterian meeting. And there were, as there almost always are, several controversies on the floor. So that was all very interesting and entertaining. And that meeting, they actually had to haul somebody out who became disruptive. That was, and I thought, oh, this is fun. This is a lot more entertaining than the session.
That was faith in action.
It was faith in action, yes. And I've seen it in action many more times. And I'm sure Ray was probably there too, because he was at every Presbyterian meeting I was ever at. But it was a way to really understand how the church works and how the decisions are made, sometimes painfully, but nevertheless, it was quite an eye-opening experience. And Jill took me under her wing, kind of schooled me in how things work. Presbyterian Council, we were in the middle of a whole new kind of strategic plan. As Glenn Bell said at the time, the Presbyterian Council at one time was kind of the organization that sent out epistles to all the churches and said, well, you need a committee for this and you need a committee for that, which of course in most cases was met with crickets, deafening silence. Finally, I remember Glenn Bell saying, well, this is like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. If we don't change the way we do business, we're not going to be able to move forward. And so through a long strategic planning process and discernment, we became the connector, which was a big shift for the Presbyterian kind of structure. Instead of sending down mandates, we would work with congregations to find out what they were doing and then pair them up with other congregations that might want to do that. Much more successful model, and I suspect they're probably still doing some of that. So anyway, I also met Terry Thomas, I met Ray, I met John Coppage, wonderful people, wonderful everyday saints. And as part of that work, I found myself with Ray Bowden, who it turns out is an old friend of my father's, which I didn't know at the time. And we were assigned to the commission to close Westminster. Now, you see how well that worked out. And when Kevin recruited us, he said, now, this probably should only take about 6 months. 4 years later, we were still working on it, and we finally got the little teensy-weensy congregation at Westminster to understand that they couldn't support the mission work, and they couldn't control it anymore. If somebody else was going to pay for it, somebody else had to have a hand in how it was run. It was a painful time for them, lots of tears. Many of these people have been lifelong members. Even the ones who had come in more recently had such a heart for that congregation. And so that was when we worked out sending the Lake Fellows down to do the actual church part of Westminster, because they couldn't afford a pastor, they couldn't afford to keep the lights on, couldn't afford to fix the roof, they couldn't afford any of that stuff. And so it was wonderful work. It was hard, but it was fun to be part of an organization that was kind of starting over from scratch. So one of the things that I offered to do, because I'm kind of a board rat, was to actually do the first bylaws for Westminster. And while I'm not an attorney, I am something of a board governance expert. And I get a lot of help from BoardSource and other organizations. So anyway, I'm sure they've been amended many, many, many times, but the bylaws for Westminster are the ones that I wrote way back on. And then Carolyn Ditterer came on the board, and the rest, as they say, is history. But it was a very rewarding thing to not see that closed and shuttered and see the neighborhood programs go down the tubes. So a lot of work. So just when I thought it was safe to come out of the foxhole, I got a call from Carol McDonald, who wanted to know if I would serve on the search committee. Jill had moved to Louisville. We had a couple of people who were interim, and we were in the process of searching for a new executive presbyter. So Carol McDonald called and asked if I would serve on the search committee, and I said sure, before she told me it was in Muncie. So I think we were meeting every other week, as I recall. We'd have to hot-foot it up to Muncie and spend the afternoon and go through all the resumes that would come in and set up our interview process and all that kind of stuff. It was the most fun I've ever had on a committee, hands down. absolutely the most fun. Carol is a great moderator, and we had lots of fun people on the committee, and I made a lifelong friend in Lee Lang, who's married to Ted Planch, one of our members. And so we almost hated to call anybody because it meant we weren't going to meet anymore. But we called Alan Thames, and he's been here now 15 years, right? Maybe, something like that. Yeah. That was lots of fun. After working with Carol on that project, she got the bright idea that I ought to sit on the board of directors for the Synod of Lincoln Trails. Now, talk about not understanding the presbytery system. The Synod makes no sense to anybody who has a logical mind like I do. But nevertheless, I said, well, what do you need me for? And she said, we need somebody who knows something about money. I said, oh, okay, well, I can do that. That was an eye-opening experience. The 4 years that I served on that committee, let's see, I discovered that we had a nursing home in Illinois that the Synod owned, lock, stock, and barrel. It had been bequeathed to them, that we were operating, that had 2 residents. And we needed to unravel that and get out from under that. I mean, the property wasn't really worth anything, but the liability of having 2 nursing home residents that we actually were responsible for, even though somebody else was taking care of them, was a little bit scary. So that had to be unraveled. Then the Korean church in Chicago went completely off the rails. And so part of our members became part of the commission for that congregation, and huge legal bills began to pile up because one of their members decided to sue the presbytery for the building. Most of you probably know that in the Presbyterian system, the presbytery owns, or actually the Synod, if you want the line, actually owns the real estate, which is why Presbyterian churches don't have mortgages and all those other kinds of good things, which is a good thing. But in this case, the Korean church decided they wanted the building, and it was theirs, and they were, it didn't belong to us. Well, of course it did, and it was worth a fair amount of money. So anyway, I actually don't know how that all turned out. I believe the last I heard, the pastor who had run off the rails took about half the congregation with him and started a new congregation, and then the commission went in and tried to help the remaining folks rebuild. So it was very entertaining. I did not volunteer to go on that commission because the poor people who did were driving to the north side of Chicago on a regular basis and testifying in court and doing all that kind of stuff. I mean, be careful what you volunteer for. That's probably my first message here. And we actually had to buy insurance for all the commission members, basically kind of officers and liability insurance. Because they had all been personally served with suit papers. So it got really messy all the way around. So anyway, it's lots of fun. So once I rolled off that board, I thought, okay, I can go back to doing my regular not-for-profit stuff. And then the phone rang, and you all probably remember Joe Cook, who was a longtime member of this congregation, and I can hear background noise like traffic noise, and he's driving down the Santa Monica Freeway because he's now in California. And he said, Ginger, we'd like you to consider being a member of the Finance Committee of the Board of Trustees of the Louisville Seminary. And I stopped for a minute and I said, okay, let me guess. You need a woman, you need a finance background, and you need a Presbyterian. And he started laughing, and I said, that's a really small universe, So I talked it over with Bill, and he said it was really important for us to have a relationship with one of our seminaries. And so I went down there and was ordained a trustee. While my father was the Dean of the School of Education at IU, I knew enough about dealing with faculty to be dangerous. Little did I know anything about dealing with student populations, grumpy faculty. It was an eye-opening experience. I served 12 years on that board, rolled off a year, and I'm in my second 4-year term coming back. And we've seen amazing, amazing changes. And I am proud to say that Louisville Seminary is the first Presbyterian seminary that as of this September, all students attend tuition free. Now, just when you're thinking, well, that sounds like it's a good deal for the students, but what are we getting back? One of the things that we were very adamant about is that this is not a freebie education with no strings. This needs to be in the model that is often used for physicians, where if you practice for 5 years, we'll forgive you tuition kind of thing, only we make them do it on the front end. So all of our students have to do now 3 years of field ed, and they have to be placed in places that couldn't afford to pay them. Always before, our field ed students had to go into large churches, Norton Hospital. We had to put them someplace where they'd get a salary because they were using that to pay for their education.
Sure.
So once we know we were paying for the education, then we said to them, there are not-for-profits and tiny little congregations all over central Kentucky that need you, that can't afford to pay for you, and that's going to be your gift back to the church.
Is that while they were enrolled?
While they're enrolled.
Okay.
So they're doing their field ed component and going to school full-time, and all that goes along with being a graduate student. And many of them are working part-time. We have a number of students at the seminary who already have churches because we have not just Presbyterians. About 40% of our student body are other denominations, mostly African-American denominations, where the congregation feels that their pastor needs additional theological education. And they come to us because we have a reputation for being bridge builders and being engaged in teaching our students how to listen generously to people of other faiths, so that when they go out into the world, we don't have the Fergusons of the world, we don't have the guy down in Florida burning the Koran. We have a pastorate that can talk intelligently with anybody of any faith and find the commonalities instead of the differences. So we have a lot of African American students who then say to us as they're graduating, don't tell my congregation, but I'm kind of a closet Presbyterian. So it's been very fun. So during the time I was there, we had 3 presidents, 1 interim, 3 different strategic plans to get to the tuition free. And it's been an exciting thing. We actually called Princeton to ask for them to share some data, and they're always a little huffy about that. Princeton's the 800-pound gorilla in the Presbyterian Seminary group, okay? Because they have all the money in the world, thanks to John Templeton. But we actually called them, and something was said about, we're going tuition free at the beginning of 2015. And a woman on the other line says, well, Princeton could do that, but we choose not to. And I thought, well, that's a great message to your students, right? we could save you having all of this debt, but we choose not to. So anyway, I have to say that this is the place where I've learned the most personally and learned the most in terms of what the future of the church looks like. We have a fabulous president, Michael Jenkins, who is the dean of the seminary in Austin, who has such a vision for where we can be and how we can move forward. But the best reward for that seminary service is watching the Scott Hausers of the world be successful and meet their calling in ways that will leave an enormous mark on the world. So that, it doesn't get any better than that, to watch Scott graduate, come here as a late fellow, have a very successful pastorate in Pennsylvania, and he's now up in Milwaukee maybe you remember, it's the church that the guy who's at TAB came from. And I can never remember, like Lakewood or something. It's one of the suburban Presbyterian churches. But anyway, so it's really been fun.
Who did you say? What was
Scott Hauser, remember he was a Lake Fellow. So I've had many mentors in my life, but none's been more important than Alex Carroll. Some of you in this room may know Alex. He was a senior vice president at Thompson McKinnon, which is an old line brokerage firm that used to be down on the Circle, that's long since been taken over half a dozen times. But Alex is the reason that I'm in the securities business. He was a guest speaker at one of my classes at IUPUI, and I was very impressed with him, and I'd had an interest in this area anyway. I actually wanted to be the first woman on the Federal Reserve Board, but somebody beat me to it. So I went up to him after the class and I said, how's a nice girl like me get to be in the brokerage business? And he said, well, I don't exactly know. He said, I think we're hiring. So I went to interview with him, and the guy who played the mayor in Hoosiers, Mike Dalzell, actually hired me. And so that was kind of fun. We didn't know he was a movie star at the time, but this was back in the '76. So Alex, I looked at Alex and I said to myself, you know, I want to grow up to be Alex. Alex had been the president of the chamber. He was on every board in town. He saved the symphony the first time they went belly up in the early '70s. He's raised more money than all of us in this room will ever raise. And so I just sort of followed along what he did. And I found myself on 13 different boards at one time. Now, my husband said to me, I'm going to get you the t-shirt that says, stop me before I volunteer again. But not all of the work was rewarding. And Alex gave me the best advice I've ever gotten, and which I'll share with all of you. And he said, here's how you decide where to spend your time with your volunteer work. First of all, is it important work? Is what the organization is doing important? Does it have an impact? Second of all, is it well run? And third of all, are you having fun working on it? And he said, if any of those three things are missing, you need to pick up your purse and go someplace else. So I went from 13 to 3 overnight, because the other 10, while they may have been important work, most of them were not well run, or I wasn't having any fun doing it because it was spinning my wheels. And you know, while I missed the people, which is what you really get from volunteer work, is the relationships with the people you work with, it taught me how to be much more intentional about what I volunteered for and what I spent my time on. So one of those organizations that I stayed on was the American Red Cross. And I served on their board of directors off and on, I don't know how many times. And they finally persuaded me to be chair, because very few of the boards of directors of the Red Cross around the country had women. I actually followed 2 women. Mary Marsh had been president several years before me, and then, I'm just drawing a blank on the gal's name that had been back in the 70s, early 80s. And so I began serving as board chair and found out about an initiative that the Red Cross was doing called the Tiffany Circle. And when I first heard about it, I thought, I'm not interested in this, because it sounds like all the money's going to go to DC, and I don't have any interest in, you know, spending money on infrastructure, if you will, which probably was short-sighted upon reflection, but nevertheless. So then when I got to reading it, I realized that the Tiffany Circle was a women's giving circle where all the money stayed local. That I liked. So I went off to training, and this was May of 2008. Went off to training, and I was sitting next to the board chair from Cleveland, who was also a woman. And we're in the training room in the national headquarters, and this is the hottest May they've ever had. It's 100 degrees outside, and it's 99 degrees inside, okay? Sweat's running off of us. And we're listening to the training and taking copious notes and all that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden, the gal next to me leans over and she says, oh crap, we're each gonna have to write a $10,000 check. And I looked at her and went, oh crap, yes we are. So in order to start the Tiffany Circle and be the first member, you actually have to make a $10,000 donation, which is what the Tiffany Circle is. It's philanthropic women who all support their local Red Cross at a level of $10,000. Now remember, this is May of 2008, okay? So, yeah, well, it got worse. Yeah, it got a lot worse. So my husband was staying with his Aunt Helen in Middleburg, just outside of DC. And so when I got done with the training, I went back out there to pick him up so we could start for home. And my husband's Aunt Helen, in those days, had 1976 Cadillac Eldorado convertible. And she was getting up in years, and she had always said to Roger, you know, you can have this when I can't drive it anymore. Well, somewhere in the middle of the night, her stepson, Dick, and Roger cut a deal, And as we're driving back to Indianapolis at 6 a.m. in the morning, Roger says to me, I don't exactly know how to tell you this, but he said, somewhere along the line we acquired last night Aunt Helen's car. And I said, well, great, you know, we've always wanted to do that. I said, how much was it? And he said, $10,000. I said, good, you got the car, I got the Tiffany Circle. So it was the most expensive weekend we've ever spent. So, anyway, I came back to Indianapolis and talked to our executive director, John Leiter, and I said, okay, now we've signed up for this, and you've got your first member and your chair, now what? And so we got to talking about it, and I said, you know what, let's go talk to Bill Enright. He was at the Lake Family Center by then, and he's, as you know, taught many, many people how to raise money. He's raised a lot of money in his day. And I said, let's go pick Bill's brain to see if he thinks we can actually pull this off, okay? Because asking somebody for $10,000 is a really kind of choking sort of ask. So we went to Bill, and he loved it. He said the best thing you have going for you is that all the money is staying locally, and you need to demonstrate exactly what it's going to be used for in your case, and I'll help you any way I can. So with Bill's blessing, we decided we would take off. Then, of course, October of 2008 arrived, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that was really bad timing. But by the end of October, we had 6 members. So that meant we had $60,000 that we could use, and the Women's Giving Circle decides how the money's going to be spent. It doesn't just go to the chapter. And we had worked with John and said, where's the greatest need? And the greatest need is single-family fires. The Red Cross responds to over 800 single-family fires every year. You don't hear about it, you don't know they're there, but we have a volunteer who gets up in the middle of the night and goes and helps somebody who's having the worst day of their life get off the sidewalk, out of their pajamas, into someplace safe with some furniture and some food and referrals to the other social service agencies and a place to be safe. I mean, we have to replace their eyeglasses and their prescriptions, and you know, you lose everything in a fire. And it's not the people in this room necessarily, it's the people who are in the IH network. It's the least of the least, the people who are living in the center city, who didn't have anything to begin with, and now they really don't have anything. So that $60,000, in those days, we could take $1,000 and take a family of 4 off the sidewalk and get them someplace, and get them taken care of and get them food. I mean, it's remarkable to me that it only took $1,000, but that's what we use now. It's more like $2,500, depending upon what the situation is. And the Red Cross uses debit cards that have restricted, you can't use it for cigarettes and booze and that kind of stuff. But you know what? We find that the families never do. They never abuse it. They are so grateful to have somebody take care of them that they don't abuse our goodwill. I mean, we just have never had that because they know that this is all they've got to get them back on their feet. So we now have 24 members, and the Tiffany's commitment is a $10,000 commitment per year. So 24 members means we have $240,000 to come in to offset, the $1.5 million that we spend every year on single-family fires. But the members say to me, every time I open up the paper or every time I hear the news that someone was burned out of their apartment, I know exactly where my money's going. And so the Tiffany Circle money goes directly to those debit cards. I mean, it doesn't become part of the budget or anything else. It goes directly to help those families. So it's for me, it became just an amazing way to help the community out. What I didn't realize is that it was going to become personally an amazing journey. So in the next couple of years, both the gal from Cleveland and I were recruited to the National Council. And that's the organization that runs the Tiffany Circle on a volunteer basis, because Red Cross doesn't have staff for that kind of stuff. So we're in charge of making sure that we're finding more members and creating good member experiences, because when somebody writes a $10,000 check, there are people that just want to do that and ride off into the sunset. There are other people who have other reasons for becoming part of the organization, having to do with networking, meeting new people, some travel, that kind of stuff. So we have about 750 members nationwide. Here we have another 70 in Canada. We have another 50 in the United Kingdom. We have 4 in Paris, 4 who've always been there. And we have a couple of members in Belgium. And the head of the Red Cross in Afghanistan, who is this fabulous woman, is in the process of recruiting 2 members in Afghanistan. Now, who knew that we had people who had $10,000 in Afghanistan? But there's money there, and she knows where it is. So, we host an annual summit every year in Washington, where we invite all of the members. Generally, we get about a third of the membership. A lot of people are like, yeah, I don't want to go to Washington. But it gives them a chance to come together, engage in a mission project while they're there. This year we will be installing smoke alarms in several neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. We go out with the hunky firemen, and they tell us where to put it, and sometimes they put it in for us, but then we work with the families on an escape plan and that kind of thing. So we'll be doing that. Christine Lagarde, who is the head of the IMF, who told the Greeks no, is our guest speaker on Friday night, and then we have a number of speakers on Saturday night where we honor our serving military, and we always have serving military at each of our tables and get to hear their stories. So as we have a huge component of Red Cross work is service to military families. We do a lot of that work down in Camp Atterbury, but not so much here in Indianapolis since the fort closed. So we held our first international summit in 2014, and the United Kingdom contingent, God love them, put this all on themselves. And the highlights for me were having dinner in Henry VIII's dining room at Hampton Court Palace. That was pretty swell. And I got to introduce Carson the butler from Downton Abbey and got a big hug for him. And I have a picture to prove it. So, so that was pretty cool. The most important lesson I learned from the Red Cross experience is that you need to be intentional about your philanthropy. Driving back from DC, I'm thinking to myself, where the heck am I going to get $10,000? Because I'm a working stiff, you know. I don't have a lot of stock options. I don't have any stock options, especially since we've been taken over 2 or 3 times. Anyway, so the money that I give comes out of my current income. So I had to figure out, okay, where am I going to get an extra $10,000 over and above my seminary commitment, which is substantial, and my church commitment, which was substantial. And of course, you know, we've had 2 or 3 capital campaigns during that period of time. So I'm thinking, ooh, how am I going to do this? So I went home and I looked at my tax return, and I realized that I've been giving almost that much, $50 at a time, to anybody that asks me. And you all do that in this room. And my advice to you is stop doing that, okay? I might as well have been driving down Meridian throwing $100 bills out the window, because I had absolutely no idea what any of those charities was doing with that money. Didn't have a clue. And I wasn't making any impact with my $50 contribution, okay? So I went back to the drawing board and said, okay, seminary, church, Red Cross, that's it. And you know what? It's a very easy thing to convey to somebody, because when somebody comes up to me, like Carolyn, who wants some money for Westminster, okay, I can say to her, you know, Carolyn, I believe in the cause, you're doing wonderful work, but I have a plan for my philanthropy, and you're not in it. And you know, people understand that. So if I don't send you away with anything else, it's go home and look at where you're giving your money, and make sure that it lines up with your family's goals. Start with what your family feels strongly about, or you feel strongly about, and then look at your giving and see whether there's a disconnect. For most of us there is. We give because somebody nice asked us, and we want to be supportive, and we, you know, they gave to us, and so we feel, you know, the quid pro quo is good. But you really need to be more intentional about how you do this. So I have a couple of lessons to leave you with, and then I want to open up for comments and questions and conversation. Number 1, seek out mentors you admire, and don't be shy about asking for advice. Al Fox, Tom Lake, Paul Quarter-Peter, Bill Enright, all of those people, Alex Carroll, all of those people who are people who I felt I was able to say, what would you advise? And they all had great advice. I mean, we oftentimes overlook the fact that people that we know are good at something we're not good at, and so we should ask for their help. Decide what you're passionate about, and then go all in, spiritually, financially, direct service, whatever. But make sure that what you're doing lines up with what you're passionate about and what your values are. Be intentional about your philanthropy. Make sure it mirrors your values. Make the most of the relationships you develop in your charitable work. I can't tell you what a gift all of these volunteer efforts have been in my life, and the people that I've met, and the friends I have all over the world now, and the people who are so supportive. I had open heart surgery in November, and I'm getting emails from the UK and from Belgium, and you know, who knew that you would have those kind of relationships. And last but not least, make sure that your spouse or partner is willing to eat peanut butter sandwiches, because you're never going to be home. Okay? So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts about your philanthropy, how you spend your time. Yes?
I have a question. On the $50
Mm-hmm. Throw it out the window?
giveaways. So I either heard this or at some point and sort of bought into it, that there are many organizations who are looking to raise funds from other entities that have greater resources than I do. And one of the stats that this other organization or grant giving entity looks at is the number of people who are contributing at any level to your organization. So I was thinking, okay, so my $50 is one more person on their giving list. It's not a huge financial impact. So I'm just curious what you know about, do you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
That idea is not a new idea. I mean, that's out there, right?
Yeah, yes and no, yes and no. Grant makers look at, first of all, do you have 100% giving on the part of the board? And if you don't need to bother to sign the grant request, because they're not going to honor it. They look at your giving history, but they don't care much about the annual $25 donor, because they know, like everybody in this room knows, you gave because somebody asked you, not because you're committed to the mission. If you were committed to the mission, it'd be a 4-figure gift, okay? So they're looking at the donors over a certain level. They're not looking at the $25 and $50 donors, because they know what every fundraiser in America knows. The $50 donation is because somebody asked you and you wanted to be nice. It's not because you care anything about the mission or you're going to support. And frankly, those donors are never going to be upgraded unless something speaks to them in the mission going forward. Red Cross has this problem. Most organizations are dying to find new donors. The Red Cross has millions of donors at $25. We don't have any idea who they are. We don't know why they gave. They probably gave because they saw Katrina or they saw Sandy or they saw whatever. Episodic donors are not the donors that you can rely on for your ongoing operations. And so part of the Tiffany Circle mantra is we're trying to replace the reliance on episodic donors, because if you have a situation like we've had with the Red Cross for the last 2 years, we haven't had a major incident, you know, we just haven't. So you're not on the radar screen. I mean, everybody's thinking, well, the Red Cross is doing fine. They don't know that we're responding to 850 fires a year, haven't a clue. And that the work goes on day in and day out. They're only looking at the big items. So grant makers look at the donors, but they only look at the